So welcome on behalf of MyWorld and UWE Bristol's Digital Cultures Research Centre. Thanks for joining us on this lovely evening. I'm Mandy Rose, Professor of Documentary and Digital Cultures at UWE Bristol. And around a decade ago, I observed a curious cultural phenomenon as artists and producers flocked to engage with the virtual reality technology that had just become accessible to creators. This was a technology platform that might have been expected to be of interest for gaming, but not for the sober business of telling non-fiction stories. So why did this happen? Well, if there is one person whose story can throw light on this moment of innovation, it's Nonny's La Peña. In 2012, before VR tech was generally accessible, she showed a VR project, Hungry in LA, in the New Frontiers section of the Sundance Film Festival, inspiring huge interest in spatial storytelling, which was really something very novel to people at that time, to most people. In addition, one of the team who worked with her to hack together the tech for that project went on to develop it as a commercial platform. We're going to hear more about some of this. Since that time, Nonny has, alongside roles like her current position as Program Director of the Narrative and Emerging Media Lab at Arizona State University in LA, Nonny's continued to pioneer in immersive nonfiction, creating a series of extraordinary and purposeful works, pushing at technological boundaries in spatial nonfiction, with an always keen eye on the ethical challenges that immersive platforms can give rise to. She's been garlanded with praise and awards, including the prestigious Peabody Field Builder Award. So it really is a great pleasure and an honor to welcome you, Nonny, this evening to hear more about your journey in immersive storytelling. There is going to be a Q&A after the talk, so please hold those thoughts to ask afterwards, yeah? So welcome, Nonny.
Yeah, it's so beautiful out there, so thank you for coming in here, really. And really, I also, Mandy was actually a really important part of my journey because Mandy convinced me to do some writing for a book that we put out, and that ended up being one of the chapters of my PhD dissertation. So I'm really grateful to both to Mandy in general and for my own time, and also for the incredibly kind invitation to come here to speak to you all. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started.
Really be terribly helpful in giving an avenue for that, and then hopefully.
So, can you convince your computer that you're human? This was a friend of mine, Peggy Wild's project called the blurring test. Rather than can the computer convince you it's human, can you convince your computer that you're human? And you're going to have to think beyond CAPTCHA in little sliding, street lights and bridges or motorcycles that you have to do on the computer. Think of something a little bit deeper. Like if you had an AI being that you had to convince you were human. So as I do this talk, I'm going to come back to it at the very end. So I'm going to go on from there. This has been a real couple of days thinking about multisensory. And one of the early projects I did with Mel Slater's lab was embodying a robot.
Nice to meet you. Molt de gust. Welcome to Barcelona. Benvinguda a Barcelona. I don't know, Nonny, if I could ask you to raise your arms. A veure si pot aixecar els braços. Ja veieu que els aixeca. Keep them up, because now we'll show the robot. I ara anirem a veure el robot, que ja veieu. Can you move them a little bit more? A veure si els pot moure una mica més. Up and down. Doncs ja veieu que el robot reacciona perfectament amb la Nonny. Nonny, I'm ready to interview you now for a few minutes. Li farem una entrevista a la Nonny per veure què li ha semblat aquesta experiència. You're a journalist, ella és una periodista, i fa una estona ha entrevistat un científic de Barcelona. You just interviewed a researcher from Barcelona, but in a body of a robot. What was that experience like?
So for me, it starts to feel very natural after a while. Occasionally, there's some problems with the eye movement, my head if I move too fast. But beyond that, very quickly, I'm there in Barcelona with you.
But this is what it was really like on the other side. Really hard work and exhausting and very difficult to drive that robot from afar. Now, I'm gonna go back and past now, and it's kind of tiring for me to talk about myself, so forgive me if you've already heard the beginning part, but hopefully it'll lay out the new stuff as well. Really, that's how I'm gonna feel telling you about some of the old stuff as well. But anyway, let me tell you a little bit more about myself. So a friend of mine asked, OpenAI, what are my top awards? And I spat out these 3 awards. You already know I won the Peabody, everything else was a lie. And in fact, he was trying to transcribe an interview with me for a book. And actually, OpenAI decided, if you get to know me, I talk very fast, I change subjects quickly. And I had changed the subject in the middle of our conversation, and the AI really hated that, and the transcription decided to literally take the transcript and start a conversation that we didn't have. And with him saying, "What'd you say?" And me saying, "Oh, well, I decided to have a benefit concert on the road." I mean, like literally, as he put it, it appeared to get bored and daydream and just embellish like the worst case of a journalist getting fired for making up stories. Anyway. But my background really came from print journalism. Martha Gellhorn called it this desire to tell people what it's like, the view from the ground. I was a correspondent for Newsweek magazine, where I did things like hang out in a crack den for 24 hours. And then I had got invited to come to this lab, this was in 2007. When my poor husband was packing up our house, moving from Ithaca to LA, and I went off to go do this, which was to translate an existing significant documentary project into digital media. And I had done a doc on Gitmo, that had a big segment about Gitmo, and you can see on the left is the real way people were brought to the prison. On the right was what we
As soon as I had put on my orange jumpsuit, I was thrown into the back of a C-17 transport plane, and
you're immediately bound, and then a black hood comes over the vision of your avatar. Shut up! We then integrated some sounds that were based on descriptions of what real detainees heard. When the black hood is removed, you find that you're in a cage. Most of the footage is from original Defense Department shots of detainees in Guantanamo Bay.
A replica of Camp Delta will be added to this Camp X-Ray soon. Nonny wants it to include a habeas corpus game, enhancing the simulation of a place outside of the law.
Like a regular video game where you get your choices. What do you do now? Call your parents? Call your lawyer? Ask what you're in here for? And the answers are, no, you can't call your parents. No, you can't call your lawyer. Sorry, not allowed to give you that information.
I can't believe habeas corpus is back in the news. But in doing that project, I had done a lot of what we call Freedom of Information Act work. So I had a lot of reports of how detainees were being treated in Gitmo, right? That led me to make a piece that was trying to investigate this idea of enhanced interrogation techniques, right? There was a lot of denial about calling it torture. And I was refusing not to use the word torture, and I was actually getting a lot of criticism for it. So we were kind of investigating this and ended up doing the piece that really would kind of mark the next stage of my career.
Head-mounted display. If this is uncomfortable to
There weren't even goggles in. So all the audio you're hearing got changed from a real interrogation log from the sergeant told the detainee to stand up, sit down, to we had an actor reading it, sit down, stand up, right? And the thing is that everybody was sitting in a chair like this, hands behind their back, but sitting up. But when we asked people what was their body like, it was crazy. Everybody reported they were hunched over in a stress position. And that was kind of when, like, holy shit, this stuff can actually really make people feel things in a way that none of my other work has ever done. And that's when I coined the term immersive journalism. And this paper then was published, and that's how this whole thing got started. But not very long after, we didn't know what was really going on in the rooms. We only had was a few transcripts like that. But this came out actually in a trial here. A video released about the death of somebody named Baha Musa. And actually, the work we did was surprisingly accurate. And I apologize, some of my work is pretty bleak, but I don't know how else you shine a light on some of this stuff. Okay, that next piece which Mandy mentioned was hunger in Los Angeles, right? People, this was during the Great Recession, and people were going hungry. And food banks were running out of food in America. And initially, I thought, well, gee, you know, what if you're there when a family's, there was no, by the way, there's no GoPro cameras yet, so everything had to be made digitally. And I was out with an intern recording audio, and I thought, what if you're there at the moment when a family runs out of food, like a mother has to turn to her kid and say, we have to go. What was that like? And what we found was this crazy, horrible silence. And we didn't end up building with that. My intern recorded a day instead where a man standing in this line who had diabetes, didn't get food in time, and his blood sugar dropped too low, and he passed out into a diabetic coma. And I built this whole thing with $700 of my own money, tried this whole thing of putting cards of the real scene in the background, which actually people use a lot now. Again, I got a lot of grief for that one. But, and every character was actually animated through motion capture by this guy, John Brennan, who was unbelievably talented to play even the children.
Take 4, mocap ready.
This was playing the head of the food bank who was so overwhelmed, and somebody tried to steal food at the moment where the man passes out, and everybody's just surrounded around him, and somebody sneaks around the back to get food, and the woman running the food bank just, anyway, he's playing her, which is extraordinary. Oops, I think we have that. And this is the piece that got into Sundance. The only headset at the time was the Wide 5, and the head of the lab was like, forget it, that's not going anywhere, $50,000 a pair. So we started making headsets in the lab, and those black dots you can see are basically where your eyeballs should be. And we were arguing over where the lenses should be because I have a really skinny head and he had a really big fat head. And I like calling him a fat head now. But anyway, that's Palmer Luckey's headset. The PR4, the HMD, the guy who then, after he went to Sundance with us and drove the truck around and crashed on my couch, about a year later started Oculus Rift, right, which then got bought for $3 billion, and now he's doing drone war things. But that night, opening night, we didn't know.
What'd you think? Oh, you're crying. You're crying. Gina, you're crying.
All right, and there's Fathead Palmer. So, and that is the Oculus Rift taped together. So he sold that company and all the money and a black taped thing with the logo. So never give up on your dreams because boy, can you blag your way to billions. All right, so why does this volumetric content and spatial computing work, right? And I would say we're hardwired to adopt representations of ourselves as real. In this image here, these characters were either donated or I bought some of them off the internet, right? Some of them already animated. And I had people say to me, oh, I could tell that was a seizure victim because his knees were all scratched up. Or I could tell the lady in red who played the person stealing the food, somebody said to me, oh, I could tell she was a heroin addict by the needle marks on her arms. It was like just completely made up stuff that people put into the scene. It was pretty extraordinary. This actually made the TV news in Los Angeles. That's the Virgin Mary in a tortilla. Surely you can see that. Surely you can see it. Come on, you can't see the Virgin Mary? All right, anyway, so, but this thing is pretty well documented in studies. This is back in 2006. They gave some people an ability to look at a 3D model of an ear versus a flat ear, and those that looked at the 3D model were the intervention group, and their mean score was 83% on a quiz about the anatomy of the ear versus the flat folks who only did 65%. This is an older study where they put people in they're working on brain-computer interfaces, but they were trying to help people who are paraplegics walk again, and they had them in a headset, and they were surprised a year later that people were actually, by imagining their bodies, were starting to have synapses be returned. And it wasn't that they could get up and walk, but they could control their bowel movements, which was a big quality of life. And I thought, okay, this is a really old study. What happened with all this? And for this talk, I went and looked, and sure enough, there's a group in Australia who've been working, actually using the same thing to help paralyzed people walk with some success, okay? So I'm talking about 3 key concepts in my work that I talk about: duality of presence, space and place, and embodied digital rhetoric. The first is this duality of presence, which part of, we were talking about, is that awe today that became part of our conversations. What does it mean when you put on a headset and you're taken to those places and you feel like you're there? You know you're here, but you feel like you're there too. And that was something I saw over and over, even in the earliest Sundance with our crazy ass, even then duct-taped headset, where you could see out the sides, and yet people were very engaged with the person on the ground. And this is a piece that also I try to use that to create some sort of connection and empathy.
40% of homeless youth come from the LGBTQ community because they've been thrown out from their homes due to their sexual orientation. After I gave my talk at TED Women, the actress Sara Ramirez approached me, and she really wanted to make this piece about homelessness in the LGBTQ community. In collaboration with the True Colors Fund, I was lucky enough to begin working with them on finding the right material to tell the story. We ended up using the audio of Daniel Pierce, who was thrown out by his own family, and he happened to record the terrible confrontation that ensues.
Oh, get off of me! What's wrong with you? Bring it! What's wrong with you?
So by putting the audience in the middle of this physical moment, using the motion capture, putting on digital characters, and then making it life-size so it happens all around you, it's so startling. Suddenly this thing you've heard, which is disturbing enough, and maybe you've watched videos of this type of scene, but if it's there and you feel physically vulnerable, you connect to Daniel and to what he's going through in a way that I don't think any other medium affords.
So Daniel really wanted to see this happen, and we worked very closely with him in setting up the rehearsals. He decided not to be there on the final recording. It was too hard for him, but he was deeply, deeply engaged in the entire process. And I do at the end also, we did volumetric capture of folks who'd gotten to the other side after being thrown out by their families and been homeless, to give some messages of hope. And I'm always grateful for the kind of collaboration that I can get in some of these things. So after making those crazy-ass headsets, because after Palmer started Oculus, he started making this sit-down-only headset, and I had to start 3D printing stuff. But before I did that, I actually ruined Oculus number 154 by taping trackers to it and stapling them on. And it made you sick. So I had to go into making my own headsets if I wanted to create what I felt, that strong duality of presence of being able to walk around. And at this time, we also were working on controllers as well. I had to find this very expensive motion capture system. I found it in a bankruptcy sale for $7K. And why? Because I want to tell stories about people like this, who was brought to the US as a young boy, Anastasio Hernandez Rojas. This project ended up being the first VR piece shown at Tribeca, and it tells a story of how he's, during the downturn, he can't get any money, so he can't work, has no money. Mother's Day, he steals a steak and a bottle of tequila for his wife. He gets caught, he gets deported, and then the Border Patrol beat and taser him to death. And BuzzFeed had us come in to show this piece. Now, I would never do this like I did this piece again, in that they made us show the piece to some of their employees without telling them what the subject matter was. And I think that's a real violation when you're showing them somebody getting beaten to death, essentially. So I would say those are some of the things that I've learned. If you want to watch the whole reaction, they were pretty, it was pretty amazing. Now, particularly at that time, I could only show these pieces at small festivals with, as somebody was talking about yesterday, small throughput. But that video that BuzzFeed had got us nearly 1 million views about a case that otherwise was completely buried. And I think that was really important, including all literally the comments. And I think discussing race in America in ways that back and forth, that was super, super interesting. Of course, there was a few folks who stumbled onto this. I Googled use of force VR, expecting someone being a Jedi in VR, not what I expected. But the other thing that we did is the way that this was constructed, again, with collaboration from people like this woman who, the way that we knew was so many Border Patrol officers involved in beating and tasering this man to death, was that she was brave enough to film from a bridge that was overlooking the border. After this thing got big, the Border Patrol literally tore down that bridge so nobody could see it anymore. But in the meantime, when this happened, they were going around and they were taking everybody's cameras. And they were like, something about, you had flip phones with a little camera, et cetera, et cetera. But I brought her in and we scanned her and then had her mocap. And instead of saying, okay, so what happened that night? I had her reenact her own story, her own memories of the night, to try to start to look, what is it like to have a witness tell their story through their whole body instead of just sitting them down and having them repeat it in words. So another one of my, that's really, that duality presence brings you there. So space and place, when you get into my very, limited Heidegger ripoff idea, which is that the space itself is the environments in which we build these stories, but they only become a place when something is told within those places. So I had somebody who, they make the game Puzzling Places now, who can blame them after this. They got locked into this cell for 3 hours, and we had to capture every bit with photogrammetry with just a camera. The warden wanted to get rid of solitary confinement, so he actually let us do this. And then a guy who spent 3 years in the cell, we brought him in to LA, and we volumetric captured them. And this is important, because VolCap, even to this day, is 10,000 finished minute, and I'm going to show you some things we're doing to hopefully break that expense at the end of my talk. But here's a little trailer from that project.
When I walked into my cell, I didn't realize that I would be spending 5.5 years of my life in solitary confinement. I look fine, but I'm not. 18 years old, I was new to the system, never really been in trouble before. As an adult, the solitary confinement and the sensory deprivation, years of it, drove a relatively sane young man insane. Cut myself thousands of times, just over and over and over.
Okay, that piece is definitely available, again, for people to see. We were happy to share these. This piece is a little bit more problematic because the code has changed and I have to rebuild some things. But we're talking about embodied digital rhetoric, right? What embodied, of course, we're now talking about it. Rhetoric, persuasive argument, now digital and embodied. What does that mean? We were trying to do something on climate change. This is almost a decade ago now, where we clapped a camera onto a 360 camera onto a helicopter, and then we had a 3D model of that helicopter, and you're flying over that, the 360 video gets put onto a sphere in the game engine. This was a very interesting question with Frontline. They didn't want any pilots in the seats because then they felt like you were lying to people by saying there are pilots there. They really couldn't deal with it, the truth of the embodiment feel. But, oops, sorry, quick trailer on that. I think that was a really,
when you look at the glacier like that, from the vantage point of an helicopter, it looks like it's going to be here forever. How could it possibly go away?
So if you're standing next to a glacier in a time lapse, it's an easier understanding.
We treated more
like
in the
how
last 15
much
years
is going on out there that we
than in the
cannot
previous 70
comprehend.
years. We'd like to know why.
You can go underwater. And this is how we're starting to understand and prove. First time ever where they're really measuring the temperatures underneath to show it's the warming oceans that are making the glaciers fall, disappear so quickly, right? And this is going along with them during their journey.
3, 2, 1, drop.
Okay, I'm stopping you here just because any one of us could be standing next to the toilet and dropping a thermometer back into the ocean, right? From a plane, we can all imagine that. So this was really a crucial part of this because it really demystified the science, that scientists were out like in some cubbyhole making up their stuff. And we did some studies on this, and we had people watch the same project in just regular 2D screens in 360 and volumetrically walking around the scenes. And the room scale VR was by far the most effective in conveying this message. I have worked certainly in 360. We did an incredible piece about children in the Sudan mountains. I'm sad that this piece hasn't got more play because it was Amazon, the client problems. But basically they have a plant zoo for plants that are going extinct in Amazon, and we did this time lapse and a little trolley for this tiny little micro camera of down in with the plants. It was actually a really beautiful project. And this one was done with Lena Herzog on dead and dying languages all around the world. And we took that to the Kennedy Center and probably did the most consecutive to date 360 once, which was kind of cool. Worked, if you of course, with Darren Emerson, et cetera, and that team on this piece on women activists around the globe.
The hardest lesson I've ever learned? I was 8 years old. It was the lesson that we are going to lose people in our lives, and that we don't have to get used to it, but to understand and accept it. When I lost my father, I was 2 months old. My mother had been arrested, so I lived with my stepfather. I was raised by him until I was 8 years old. He was like a father to me. When my mom had been out of jail for a week, my stepfather was killed. The lesson is to accept that all of this is to make us stronger.
So mostly I have worked on trying to try to do the kind of realistic and realism and nonfiction, and this was a piece in which we were trying to get a women's history museum in Washington, D.C., and I concentrated on a woman who was a printed this newspaper. She was also the first female postmaster, and when we had the first Declaration of Independence, was considered the official one because if you signed your name, it was treason. So this was the first signed Declaration of Independence. So Mary Catherine Goddard, she actually put her name on it for the first time. She actually signed the U.S. Declaration of Independence from the British. Anyway, a little aside there, a little poke. But she also left everything to her slave, freed her. In Baltimore, which was major slave territory at the time. So here's to the slave that was freed, maybe came through Bristol. But to get a revolutionary era printing press is very difficult and expensive, but we found somebody who had a museum, and they let us come in and scan it and do the photogrammetry so that we could put the volumetric capture and photogrammetry together. And I think, as far as I know, this is the first piece that ever got done putting the two technologies together. I used all of her written words to inform that script, and then did a piece on, as things have gotten better and better in volumetric capture, with
It's a very, very strong spiritual connection between me and music. I went down to the St. James Infirmary. I went down to the St. James.
So you see how beautiful volumetric capture is getting. And actually, this was a piece about a female Olympic fencer from the US, and she used to fight this guy when she was 10 because there was no women, and then in college they used to fight, and when I recorded this, they were engaged to get married, so I think it's the first volumetric kiss. When you're in the piece, you have to dodge their swords, but anyway. So making this stuff is, you know, it's led me to some very interesting journeys. This is the film director Alejandro González Iñárritu, who came to see Hunger. You'll see that sand patch in the background. Those were all helped inform his piece, Carne Arena. If you've seen it, you'll see the sand in the back, and he won the first Oscar in VR, which he very kindly shared with me and thanked me on stage and presented my real award, the Peabody, for me. How many people are familiar with the Uncanny Valley? I think enough of you. I'm going to just quickly whip through what the idea is, which is that as things get more and more real, unless it's really real, it starts to freak you out. And that dip is the freak out part of it all, until it gets back to being real. And it's considered like the concept that digital characters can produce a creepy sensation if they're situated in the supposed computer-simulated purgatorial state between friendly low fidelity and real enough. But I take a different tact when I talk about realism, that realism isn't required to eliminate that creepiness described by the Uncanny Valley theory in virtual reality. So, did a piece about a bomb going off in Syria, particularly focused on a young girl. We really spent a lot of time on the research, on how real could we get, how accurate could we be, but unfortunately with no budget, this is what my character looked like. Talk about creepy, right? But the piece ended up at the Victoria and Albert Museum here after going to other places. There's our, you know, that one of the last times I had to use my own headsets and cameras, thank God, the new technology against the old tapestries. But after it was done, we had 54 pages in our guest book of people just outpouring their emotional feeling about the piece. The museum curator called it, you know, unprecedented, absolutely, completely immersed, you know, fascinating, something you'd normally see on TV news, totally believable, blah, 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 including from a woman who said, this was a very difficult piece to experience as a Syrian whose family is still living in alms. Although I felt the piece was inappropriate at first, I've certainly changed my mind after experiencing it firsthand. It's important for the world to bear witness to the situation in Syria, and this is a powerful and effective way to do that. So what I'm saying to you is that while immersion can break in VR, I found it wasn't actually the eeriness that caused the problem, it was rather when the realism was not matched with behavioral realism, i.e. if the character walks into a wall or goes through a car without whatever, so that we go, hang on, people can't do that. And that, I think, breaks it more in VR. And I think I can talk to you about doing this more thoroughly on, or another bit of evidence of this was a piece I did about, that took you to the side of health clinics and showing what women experience and in terms of being yelled at. I was trying to make more higher fidelity characters. For anybody who might find this triggering, please, I'm sorry, just to give you an idea. This is real audio, and he is just lip syncing to this audio, and it's pretty brutal, right?
You're a whore. You're a whore. You're a whore. You're a little whore. How about stop being a whore? You whore. Shame on you. Start closing your legs. Start having some respect for your body. Maybe your parents should have aborted you.
Remember, he did not say one of those words. This guy did a great job mocapping. So we took that piece to places where folks would not be, you know, tolerant of clinics. And yet, 3/4 said they would support legislation to keep protesters away from clinics, right? They would even vote in that manner because people don't think it's okay for women or anybody to be screamed at in that way. That is a place we can agree. And I thought the piece did a really good job of that. But of course, it's very difficult to show everywhere a whole big setup, blah, 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 particularly then when everything was much more intense in terms of not getting a throughput. And we ended up making a 360 video piece. When we took it to the Sundance Film Festival, on one hand, we showed the full walk-around version, and even the reviewer from Yahoo saying, you know, there's no uncanny valley when you're being screamed at and told you're going to invoke God's wrath. However, for the Gear 360 video version, it felt contention that takes away from the overall seriousness of the subject matter. Same characters, same thing. It's whether the user was able to walk around the scene or whether they were fixed in one position, even though everything was the same. And it's that sense of presence, I think. When that gets violated, rather than the fidelity to realism, or the lack thereof, that really break the connection. And I say, think about user embodiment and don't worry so much about necessarily all the quality of your graphics if you don't have big budgets. I'm trying to encourage you all to do your own work and not be afraid by it. And you know, as we get back to the uncanny valley, as robots come around, yuck, I do not want that robot anywhere near me, ick. And so this is the ones people are trying to make. Anyway, also for people to try to say to you, there are tools that make it easier. This is totally bootstrapped, so forgive its problems, but try.reach.love is a button-based system to let you make volumetric content, and you can author yourself and you can share it on the web for a computer, for a headset, for your phone. It's all, I said, button-based, and you can publish, and headset optional. So how did I use it? Well, I worked on a piece about a kid who was put in one of the American concentration camps that we put Japanese Americans in during World War II. He was an incredible, incredible thinker, had a beautiful diary while he was stuck here in one room with his family, did these drawings that we made in Quill that we animated, and it was embedded in the Guardian. And are you going to play for me? Sorry. They'd asked me to, you know, interview me, and I'm like, look, let's put this WebXR piece. It's just like a video, but it's volumetric, and let's put it in the paper. Like, well, all right, here's a code, and as you can see, you're able to look around like a 360 video, but you can use your WASD keys, your arrow keys to go through the space, and that's a scan of a real barrack that we actually then put the family into that scene. And then if you hit the VR button, you can walk around in a headset. 45,000 views. And I just want to shout out to the Japanese American National Museum, because in the middle of these attacks right now by Trump, they are not backing down. And you can try Reach. Like I said, the beta is available. I used it in 2020 for a piece that I wanted them to embed in the South by South thing. Looking forward to being back together in 2021 after we stomp out this bugger. So I put myself in front of this green screen, right? And then recently I asked Midjourney to take all the green away from me, and rather than take away the green screen, it turned me into a buxom blonde because all hail the great hallucinator, and you have to be careful. Happy child, white. Happy person, white. Small child, white. MIT student wanted a more professional headshot, white. It doesn't matter if you're Mexican in Mexico or Mexican in the US, you look like a Mexican with a sombrero. And don't think this is going away. Just the other day, I saw this I was looking for something mid-journey. Somebody else had asked for this, a stylish modern songwriter, white dude. And Levi's was, instead of like trying to hire models, they're like, well, look, we'll make more diversity by not paying diverse models. And, you know, as my friend Robert Tursick said, you got to think about the household AI was raised in, right? It's just, there are all these embeddings of, you know, he gets to be a physician, she gets to be a homemaker. Do you know what I mean? It's pretty professor or assistant professor. Again, what's associated with women, and this is what the AI is being trained on. How many people know this one? Father and son get in a car crash and are rushed to the hospital. The father dies, the boy is taken to the operating room, and the surgeon says, I can't operate on this boy because he's my son. Can you explain why? Everybody know that answer? Yeah. Kind of, maybe, sort of, some of you? I'm not even going to get into this. For time-wise, I'm going to move on and just tell you, of course, the mother's the surgeon, right? But this is a great one. You can go watch that on the web, but it's a pretty great thing on this. We also, a friend of mine asked, who are the leading women in VR? And number 7 is a man. And Amazon tried to use an AI tool for recruiting, thinking, okay, it's got to be non-biased if we don't know if it's a man or woman. But apparently men were putting the words execute and capture on their resumes, and women weren't, and they were hiring men. And of course, we have to worry about AI launching nukes, right? Listen, I'm a little bit joking about that, but not totally, right? And I, on the other hand, use AI for pretty much everything I do and make now, right? It's completely integrated into my workflow. So how? Early AI, I worked many years ago on a cover story for Newsweek about Lyme disease, and then made a VR piece about it. And I wanted to do something about this doctor who'd been chasing protecting patients who are being accused of making up their symptoms after they've taken antibiotics. And
you only get a case like this once or two in a career.
Too old.
You only get a case like this once or two in a career.
And then because I'd reported on it, I put myself in as my younger self.
30 years ago, I helped write this cover story. Our reporting was accurate on Lyme disease. It's difficult to diagnose. A single course of antibiotics may not cure everyone, and it's spreading rapidly.
So a little trailer on that.
Tiny tick, big worry.
I think we'd have long Lyme. People don't think it's so implausible, but for decades, people would just tell patients like Vicky, go to a psychiatrist. I also used the deepfakes for this project that's going to launch with that South by version, and the final version will be launching at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. It tells the story of the Atlanta race, what was called the Atlanta race riots, but actually was a massacre. And this was a guy who was a newspaper editor who wrote this incredible treatise about what happened. He was run out of town for publishing about it. But some of you may be familiar with one of our more important thinkers, W.E.B. Du Bois, and he was there, and this is how we made the deep fake of Du Bois.
I never shot a bird nor killed a rabbit. I never liked fishing, and always let others kill even the chickens I ate. Most of my schoolmates in the South carried pistols. I never owned one. I could never conceive myself killing a human being. But in 1906, I rushed back from Alabama to Atlanta where my wife and 6-year-old child were living. A mob had rages for days killing Negroes. I bought a Winchester double-barrel shotgun and a dozen rounds of shells filled with buckshot. If a white mob had stepped on campus where I lived, I would, without hesitation, have sprayed their guts over the grass.
And to give you an idea of like how when I started the project, and this is what
when the storm broke, it was Saturday night, when the Negroes were doing their marketing for Sunday.
And then more recently,
when the storm broke, it was Saturday night.
So it's getting better and better in terms of the quality of what you can do, right?
When the storm...
and this piece just won a Tully Award, and that's kind of fun for some of its technical achievements. But when Bourdain, when they did a documentary about Bourdain, they used AI to mimic his voice. And when I first made the Please Believe Me project, I was saying, like, do we want our character, Vicky, are we going to see her as a deep fake?
These are my mini medical records. They go back.
That's obviously my voice, was testing it. And my developers were like, no way, it's unethical, you can't use it, you can't use it. Well, you can see with the Du Bois one, it worked quite well. And I'm not sure, I kind of thought Vicky looked cute alive. And I sort of was sad that I only pictured her kind of dead and animated and not, I don't know. I'm not sure that I know the answer to that question, right? And certainly, this was a way that...
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. मेरे पाकिस्तानियों, सबसे पहले मैं उस तारीखी काविश पर अपनी सोशल मीडिया टीम की तारीफ करना चाहूँगा। आप सब शायद सोच रहे होंगे कि जेल में मेरा क्या हाल है। सबसे पहले मैं ये वाज़ेह करना चाहता हूँ कि पाकिस्तान की हकीकी आज़ादी की खातिर
So they
जेल में
took his
रहना
voice.
मेरे लिए इबादत के मुतरादिफ है. PTI को वर्कर्स कन्वेंशन.
And they just made an AI message. They use AI tools to emulate his voice with notes written on scrap of paper, and he actually won that election. So before you panic about deep fakes and everything else, what are some of the tools for us to figure out provenance and truth? So this was one experience really done by a guy named Jonathan Doughton, in which working with the Rolling Stone to try to figure out who killed, was one of, Bosnian guy who did a bunch of massacres, right? As you see in this photograph, there's an eye in the bottom left of the photograph, and clicking on that eye, the project with Rolling Stone, would show what the photograph was, how it was cropped, what filters were used, and what the provenance was in terms of who's the photographer, as we attempt to create tools for audiences to have confidence in the work that we're doing. And he's also done that with some of the Holocaust stuff. But the AI tools are not going away, and people are using them to make their own films. This was kind of a cool AI overlay using Stable Diffusion, where it's changing the whole time. In a headset, while you look around, these overlays just shift and change. They're kind of beautiful, I think. Certainly can help you with things like a literature review, but really importantly, when you're building in a game engine, the tools are still pretty tough to use. They're still pretty darn hard. And one of the hardest parts of building in Unity is the coding, the C# coding that you need to do to match within the game engine. And so this was just a really fast test that I did, asking ChatGPT to write the code for me to literally just drive a car across the street, but you can't just move it. You have to have the car wheels rotating so it looks real. Otherwise, you lose that, that presence I talked about, the behavioral realism if the car's tires aren't rotating. So there you go. That's how fast, and now I have all the code I need in the time it took for me to explain this to you. Pretty amazing, right? Also, there's a lot of tools now to let you make 3D models. It's just happening really, really fast. So here was my prompt, asking for a female gingerbread person, man, female gingerbread man, I think I wrote, to see how it would do in a T-pose so I could put motion capture on it, make it move. I'm not going to, I mean, it was so fast, but without even showing you, it came back really quickly. I mean, in just seconds, I got my female. I actually had a choice, and then you can view and you can download it, and not only can you download it, but everybody can download all the stuff you put up there. That's the way it is right now, so if you like that texture and you want to make it on your objects, you can just grab that and use it. So that's kind of cool. Also for the 1906 project, I'm talking about very violent stuff. So I didn't want to show actual violence and blood and guts and da-da-da. So I first did an image in Midjourney, and then I brought it in, I forgot the name of the program. It doesn't really matter, one of the film programs, to animate it in the background. And then what we did is we brought it into Stable Diffusion, and then we extruded it so we could start basically designing our own things and making them have volume so you can move through the space, right? And again, this was a test and the beginning of stuff. The next thing that I've been really working on are these Gaussian splat system. This was one of my earliest Gaussian splats, where basically I just walked around with this guy with my camera, Fleming, and this was the three-dimensional character that it spit back at me very quickly. And then there's a company here in the UK, this was their first thing of doing what's called 4D Gaussian splats. That means you're adding time. So first you see this is a volumetric capture of the guy, and then they're moving, like video, with volume. And that was always the 10,000, it's still a 10,000 finished minute. It's like how expensive it was for me to do the volumetric capture for the 1906 project. So we are working on an open source version, and here's what it looks like. So tell me what's happening here, my friend Mike Corona.
So I'm controlling this array of cameras, and Steven's gonna go in there, and we're gonna do a 2-second capture. So he's gonna tell me when he's ready. I'm gonna start the cameras rolling. I'll tell him that the cameras are rolling, and then he'll do something. Yeah. Front is that way. Yeah. and then we'll stop the capture, and then we're going to process it into a 4D Gaussian splat, which will be, 3D Gaussian splats or 3D. This will be essentially a video where while the video is playing, you can move your viewpoint around freely in the 3D space.
And what's special about this equipment?
Well, it's 45 cameras which are Genlock and timecode synced, and that's really important because we're rolling video, but all the cameras have to be firing their shutters at the same time so that later we can match it up in the 3D software and matching up all the exact moments at the same time. If you have the cameras running higgledy-piggledy, then you'll get a very messy capture.
But they're just video cameras.
They're just video cameras, yeah. But I mean, the secret sauce is that they have control boxes attached to them, which are gen-locking them, and then also providing time code in common across all of them, so that later when we pull down the footage, we can match all the moments among the cameras precisely.
All right, we're ready when you are.
Okay, so Stephen, when you're ready, let me know.
All right. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, go. Okay, rolling.
So we have this processed in about 40 minutes later. So you can do it in higher res if you process it for longer. And this was what came out of the pipeline. All my students this year participating in our first experiment. We're planning to open source that code and make it available to everybody. The cameras, of course, are going to cost you about $60,000, but relative to the $10,000 a finished minute, we're hoping that this will help other people start to make their own stuff. And believe me, this is pretty advanced. This was the big volumetric capture breakthrough of image of me in 2017. So we're right on target with what we want to do with fidelity. And all these new game engines are letting you bring those volumetric, the new Gaussian splats straight into the game engine. So we're on our way. And it's what we're doing a lot here at the Narrative and Emerging Media program. Getting towards the end here, I want to tell you a little bit about our project City of Everyday Awe. And the idea really is if awe can make people act more generously and ethically, think more critically when encountering persuasive stimuli like arguments or advertisements, can we use this for good? So it's got 3 flagship programs: our Haptics for Inclusion Lab, our Lab of Civic Affection and Reclamation. I talked a lot about Haptics for Inclusion yesterday, so this was a way we're training folks how to make their own haptics, and we got identified filmmakers and artists from the disabled community who could come over and work on stuff, including we gave them fellowships. This is a little piece that one of my students did, Olivia Ting, who is trying to help people understand what her experience is like. Anyway, this piece uses this idea: can we use co-creation to help us cross divides? This is a great story of a guy at a MAGA rally in Austin, and or he came to a rally, and a MAGA guy came in his hat, and people yanked his hat off his head, and this woman went and yanked it back and gave it back to him because she was so used to having her job yanked at that she identified with what he was experiencing. So there are lots of really interesting ways in Germany, a news site, My Country Talks, really brought people from political opposites together for one-on-one conversations. This lab we're going to be building out through the year on trying to get people to come together and build each other's places of awe in the virtual space, so that I help you with yours, you help me with mine. Together we're tied by that thing we made together, and that if we keep showing it, do we keep that connection going? We'll find out. The other thing is a project reclamation, which were identified 14 places that are discarded in the US, in Los Angeles, and we're training community members how to make a digital twin of it, and using architectural models, and then Gaussian splats on top, right? You can see like what the Gaussian splats look like of all the different plants. And then we are running simulations, like how much sunlight, what do the plants need, et cetera, and creating a platform people can run their own simulations, and then you can see kind of the algorithm in action with the human form going through these spaces. I think this is my wrap-up thing of what we were doing for the LA fires and Gaussian splats. My student is here, Ashley Bushhorn on the right with me. The fires were just friggin' terrible. And we felt it was really important to capture, you know, what I had a really bad fire 2 years before, and my captures, my scans have been very helpful on many fronts, but also having a documented of the history of what happened means that it can't be forgotten so readily. And we use both 360. We went and grabbed Google, you know, the images of 360 spheres, and then took our 360s to show you the before and after of these scenes. And we also did volcap on the corners, so you can actually have a full Gaussian splat walkthrough as well. We worked with Niantic, who were trying to raise a bunch of money. And to give you an idea of what the process is for making things with just your phone, you're literally walking through and scanning. And you know, I didn't put the actual scan in my slide deck, I realized, but if you want to see what this looks like afterwards, please come see me. But it's kind of like painting a table. You have to get every section. If you don't get every section, you have unpainted bits. It's the same thing, you have to capture every section. And this was in a crazy one, really with Mike, the same guy who was in that first thing. I'm gonna go, whoops, sorry. Let me go back to this. Where we used that pole with 4 cameras to walk around what was a former Bank of America bank building in the Palisades. And they were telling everybody that everything had burned, there were no safe deposit boxes, there was nobody there. When we were there was not even birds singing when we were scanning this sort of stuff. It turns out later they were just lying to the public so nobody would try to get in there, and there was stuff there. I invite you to invite Ashley, who's here, to come and teach you, because she was teaching my other students here. And just one last thing for you to understand with this is that's the camera paths. If you want to do a big, full volumetric capture, all those dots represent an image being taken that the AI then constructs into this, like a point cloud that lets you, you get an understanding of all the stuff that's being captured by the cameras. And this is a fly-through in Unreal, so you can use virtual cameras to then fly through these scenes, right? I feel like I might I'll come back to this slide. You guys can pull your phones out later to get, if you want to look at all the stuff. But I want to wrap up first, before I bring that back up, with that question, of course, what makes you human? How could you convince your computer you're human? Anybody after that long talk still have an idea of what that might be? So bizarrely, when Peggy made this, she had these incredible logs of people saying, you know, my cat bleeds. Well, I bleed. You know, humans bleed, or whatever, right? But the one that got me the most was somebody said, I know that I'm human because I can find your creator and murder her, right? So for a long time, I was like, well, maybe that's the thing. But I then realized that, you know, the placebo test, like AI's placebos won't work on AIs, right? And in fact, they found that if you administer a placebo with kindness, it's way more effective. So my last thought on all this is that kindness is a real thing, and I know I can get hangry, but hopefully I can be more kind than hangry. So I'm going to leave this up. If you want to see, I gave over the Immersive Journalism site just to all of our fire material, and that is it when you want to open up for questions.
Yes, I thought I'll share the mic with you for a moment.
Please.
Nonny, that was awesome, really, and your energy and continued, your energy for experimentation, for grabbing this technology and doing something that worthwhile with it is just extraordinary. I can't think of a question that whipped through all that, but actually just let's talk for a moment a little bit more about the LA Fires material, because that is just so fascinating. And I'm kind of curious about what that material means for the people in those houses now destroyed, and if you've actually, if you've had encounters with that material that have been interesting, what kind of purposes do you see that material having?
So, because I think the easiest way for me to do this is to show stuff, I always find that's the case. If I can get in easily, I'm going to show you the scan I did of my own fire back 2 years ago, right?
This was when your electric bike battery burst into flame. Seeing it on social media.
Yeah. Let me see if this one's got the other one. No, I'm just seeing if I've got my, no, I do. Okay, hang on. Let me just go to Polycam. This will log me in really fast. And the reason why that's important is because I'm going to show you two things that's going to give you an idea of how important these things are. Got lots of the fire stuff up here, a lot of stuff I haven't processed. But if you look here, this was, because of COVID, I'd moved everything into this, our 2-car garage studio. And so I kind of lost everything. Let's see, is it going to load for me here? Maybe it won't load. Anyway, if it does load, I'll show you. Yeah. That in the back of the stuff is the tiniest, you can barely see there's an arm of a couch. And the insurance company was like, there's no way there's anything in there that big or whatever. I don't even know why they denied me that truth. And I was able to, oh, whoops, we're not sharing screen anymore. How is that possible?
Interesting.
I'm sorry. You know what?
Worry, but I'm not quite sure.
If I can do anything about it now.
So sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, sure. Well, I can see a capture.
All right, well, whatever. Anyway, it's pretty bad. And so I was able to show this arm right here. I think the only way I'm going to be able to do this is sort of like take a quick picture and show you guys, because I'm not going to be able to do this live, but bring it into PowerPoint and go to, what's that? Oh, just drag the window across, of course. Okay. That way? There we go. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Now, of course, I have to try to manipulate it from here. But you'll see that that's the, oh, I'm not doing very good at this. Far up. You can kind of, yeah, it's pretty bad, right? So if you see, I'm trying, y'all, sorry. There is a arm of a couch in here somewhere. Yes, there it is. See it right there? And they were like, oh, there couldn't be in there. And sure enough, there was my arm of a couch, and they had to pay on it. And so that was, for me, so like part of my now 2-year battle with the insurance company. And so we're offering scans to homeowners who then, it also you can kind of process, because every once in a while when I think of my stuff, at least I have some sort of weird memory of things. And the other weird thing here, sorry, you opened up a big thing here for me, is that there's this blue card on here. You should be able to see it if I come around well. Sorry, y'all. If you see that blue card, see that blue right in the front? Down here in the bottom? Yeah. Okay, so what that actually is a card that, where's my thing? There it is. Up here, I'm going to go one back. And I'm going to show you what that is. Crazy. How could, in the fire, something like that survive? But what that actually was, I was at USC at a dinner, and I don't, LA, you never bug celebrities, but this was from a dinner at Annenberg, and it was, Mark Hamill was there. And so I had to ask for my son, who was 6 at the time, to sign that card, and it says, "The force will be with you always. Your pal, Mark Hamill." So you don't know what's there, right? You don't know what the story's going to be of your place that's burned. And that's a pretty remarkable story. So I just wanted to pass it along, along with being a journalist and feeling it was really important for everyone to know what had happened to our city. And so other homeowners are getting the we've done about 11 days of scans, which from the morning till the night, and that's about all we could handle, right? Ashley, and those really hard work. Ashley was with us the whole way. There were times, because it was like the cello teacher's house and the place where I had my daughter's baby shower, and so like 30 of my friends' homes at least burned, and so every once in a while I just, poor Ashley, I'd be like, I gotta go sit down. And Ashley would have to scan the thing on herself. So really, she's the one who deserves a big round of applause on that project. So there you go.
Okay. So I am going to, we don't have long, we're going to be out of here by 7. So I want to open out to questions from you all. And Amy's got a microphone that can rove around the place. So Verity, hi. Microphone's on its way.
Thank you so much. That was an incredible kind of whirlwind through an extraordinary career. I was really struck by what you were saying sort of midway about the importance of the embodied experience, and that how much more important that was to people than photorealism. And I also, I guess, noticed in the talk that the sort of the technology roadmap for many of these things is to make things still more photorealistic, to kind of still strive for convincing deep fakes, and the 4D Gaussian splat is extraordinary, but it is extraordinary kind of because of its stretch towards relatable photorealism that's indistinguishable from reality. So I guess my question is, if we still think that the user embodiment is as or more important than that, like what are we missing? What should we be investing our energy or our efforts or our time in if we still think that's important, other than trying to make things kind of high fidelity?
So, because I come from that journalism background, I can't help but be striving towards, but I think also I get fascinated by the possibility, and so I can't help but push myself towards what if we could, so let's try that. But the reason I bring that up is because, I still have a $60,000 camera set up, and I've raised the money for that, and I'm barely just starting on that, and it's going to be a while before it becomes a universal tool for everybody. But I don't want people to be afraid to experiment and work in this space. And maybe that's what they need, is realism, and maybe not. And maybe not. There's plenty of pieces that are quite evocative and very powerful that aren't realistic. And you can even make kind of janky looking stuff, but create a lot of emotion. And that's the thing, that there's lots of room for creators here, and that's really the point I want to make. And I'm sure some of my stuff is still janky, so.
So, anyone else? Yeah, Paul. Cool.
Kind of follows on a bit. So it's also kind of about embodiment, and I noticed that you don't tend to talk so much about putting someone in someone else's shoes, but you tend to talk about witnesses. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about the idea of witnessing as an immersive journalist, and also I like this idea of duality, that it seems you're also interested in people being aware of their own body as well as being embodied. So I'm interested in, like, there tends to be an aim for people to feel like they're there in the virtual environment. I'm interested in that idea that we're also aware that we're still here in our own bodies and our own lived experience. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, I always had a little bit of trouble with the idea, okay, we're going to put you exactly in their shoes, and you're going to feel what they feel. And yet, like when you walk down line, you have to walk the gauntlet while somebody's yelling at you, what get yelled at you at women, right? You're not specifically any one of those women, but you are participating as somebody who has to pass through the gauntlet and get yelled at. And again, the studies on that were quite significant, and how people are like, oh, I didn't realize how bad it was, kind of thing. So it was effective in trying to convey what was happening to people, but not necessarily saying you are that person. And I think that that's one of the distinguishing things that I've kept in my work. I just felt like was, yeah, you could be standing there dropping the thermometer in the back of the toilet and doing this research, right? But you don't necessarily have to be him to understand that part of the story. I think there have been some amazing pieces made, so I'm going, which one where they put you kind of really in the shoes of somebody? I just haven't been, I think you can create connection and empathy, and I really do believe this medium is different for empathy. It just is, it's a very different medium than anything else I've ever built in any other way I've tried to connect people. That doesn't mean, it's a magic wand, you put on the headset and it's all, you're going to get exactly the connection to the story that you want. You have to still spend the time making a good story and constructing in a way that is effective and conveys what you want. But I do think it's a really, really unique and interesting medium. Just in that whole thing, you can feel like you're somewhere else at the same time. How crazy is that, right? I mean, it's obviously tapping into something of just listening to stories, right? We can be on an audio tour, that I just was, and have a really secondary feeling of your presence at the same time. And it's tapping into that. It's just also using a lot of other elements as well.
Cool. Rachel and then Judith, yeah?
Yeah, I was just interested in what your approach was to finding an audience, because obviously if it's something in a VR headset, it probably won't get the same audience that something maybe on a TV news bulletin or whatever would get. And so kind of how do you approach that? And yeah.
I actually didn't end up clicking on the 1906 video showing it's an augmented reality for the phone because it's going out to schools. And that was also really important about the storytelling, that it had that audience in mind in the design process of conveying the terrible, terrible, terrible 4 days of violence without traumatizing people, right? It's a really tricky needle to thread, but that is a purely phone-based experience for exactly this reason. I think WebXR is a magic tool. It's why I made the Reach platform. I'm hoping I'll make it better at some point. I'll have enough money to do so to really make it useful for folks, because you can publish on a computer or a phone or a headset. I find headset experiences always the most compelling, but they aren't always the most, just not going to be able to reach the same audiences. So, that's why you have to be able to, particularly now, until the glasses are not so heavy on your head. And if you've put on any of the AR glasses, they're heavy and hot and horrible. And hopefully one day, these are my Bose bone conduction audio glasses I've been wearing forever that connect to my phone, and I do my calls on it. I listen to my music. They're my sunglasses. They're my reading glasses. They're my far glasses. They're my everything. And I put them on, and bang, I'm done. And the fact that there was a Magic Leap had a pair of goggles, they're struggling. But they would go dark, right? It's just like VR. And they would go light, so you could walk around. I mean, we're going to go there, but until that time, we do have to be aware of what the distribution limitations are.
So, yeah. Yeah, Judy.
Thank you. I was really struck. Your first quote was Martha Gellhorn and the view from the ground. And you said that's where you started. I'm probably coming at similar questions from a slightly different angle. But I'm just interested in your reflection on what that means, if that's still kind of a defining thing for you. It struck with me because I was within a whisper of becoming a foreign correspondent for Reuters. So it really resonates. And for me, I think what I strive towards is authenticity in whatever way you can find that. And I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on realism versus authenticity.
I think that's why I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of providence systems. And now that we're making these Gaussian splats, which some, you know, there's issues for witnesses who could be in trouble based on surveillance or things that they're revealing. But for a lot of us, having a Mike Corona used to be general manager for Reuters Visuals, and he originally created a system that when they were ingesting all the photographs, it would say not only what photographer and where this was taken, but the serial number of the camera, the f-stop of the camera. So you get that granular bit of information. And if news organizations are willing to include something like that, a provenance system, you can have some authenticity right now in which deepfakes are, and AI is really going to become more and more real. So how do we strive for authenticity? I think that it's really important to me too, because I think that there are many, many, many important stories that we're all better off if they're told. And we need people to recognize their veracity. Otherwise, it's so difficult to make change.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, probably there's time to
There's
take one
more
more
question?
Oh. Where are we? Oh, Rob, yeah?
I think.
Thank you. I know you mentioned something about kind of, you know, using VR for good. And it's interesting, even if we're able to increase throughput and, you know, have audiences of, you know, millions, that numbers don't necessarily always lead to change. So I don't know what kind of strategies, if there's anything that you can kind of shine a light on in terms of like strategies for impact, and kind of if you really want this work to lead to change, is there anything more than just getting lots of eyeballs on it that you really that you would recommend?
Well, first off, I'm going to shout out for AGOG. I'm on their advisory board. So Eric Schmidt of Google's wife, Wendy Schmidt, so obviously a billionaire in her own right, has started a new initiative called AGOG, XR for Impact. And we have about $3.5 million a year. She's committed to quite a bit of money. And in fact, on Tuesday, I'm giving out, you know, I'm part of the team judging another 10 projects every quarter, usually under 100K. But it's amazing to think that that kind of money is going into impact right now. And I'm hoping that what that also does is sort of say to other folks in the tech industry, oh, if Schmidt family are interested, the Schmidt Family Foundation is funding this, maybe we should be interested too. So that's one thing, like how, you know, resources are always hard in this space, and the idea that there's more resources going in, whoops, I sent that flying, my hands, so I'm always talking with my hands. Anyway, so I think that's an important part of that equation. How do we make impact? You know, unfortunately, we need the dollars to get it out there. But the main three things they're supporting are Black creators, Indigenous creators, and environmental stories. Those are the three main things. I think they're going to broaden that a little bit, but right now that's the main effort. So the other thing is distribution, which you also talked about. If you know Sarah Wolozin at MIT, doc-based, but I know she's sort of leading this. I've totally signed on to it. At least 25 other people have. How do we create our own distribution system away from the big tech companies so that we can, you know, not have the stupid sign? And, you know, how often does it stop you from seeing stuff? The Oculus Meta situation, or in your, you know. So that was saying, and I was saying, well, maybe we should try to resurrect. I'm thinking now they might be all burned, but 3D printed goggles. So people can start making their own goggles too, and we're not beholden to the tech companies. So I think that might be one way that we can start to see impact, is if we take control of the distribution systems ourselves. Fingers crossed.
Well, I think that's a great moment to close on, Nonny. I mean, really, that's inspiring, and I think that's a direction many people in this room were nodding their heads and would really like to see taken up, because right? Because so I'm going to say a huge thank you, really thank you, for a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and for an extraordinary trajectory in your working life.
Yes, and thank you
Gives
for all
us
your
lots of
support. And thank you
inspiration.
all for coming on a Friday night when you should be out having a beer.
I
know.
think we will be.
It's okay. It's okay. Everybody does.